Hello, lovers of Black true crime. Let me welcome you to the Noir Nation. If I asked you to name me three Black serial killers, could you do it? What about a Black person that's pulled off a heist of epic proportions? Don't worry, I couldn't either. But being a lover of true crime and all things Black, I decided to combine these two passions into a true crime podcast exploring some of the most intriguing and lesser known criminal masterminds with a melanated leading cast. Each week, I will bring you the stories of some of the most prolific criminals you've never heard of. I'm your host, Renee Davis, and this is the Melanin Mayhem podcast. Hello, Noir Nation. I am back. I am so sorry for posting this week's episode late, but your girl was out of the country and had a few travel snafus on my way back. But nevertheless, I am here. You got me, I got you, and I got a story for you today. I am about to drop the tale of a dude who manipulated everybody he came in contact with. He was street smart, charming, and a smooth talker. He was also a sexual predator and a brutal serial killer. His talk game was so good that he could talk his way into getting people to drop their guards. But the harsh reality was he was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Our melanated mayhem maker this week started out as a solo act and morphed into a duo that would go on a crime spree spanning from May to July of 1984 through the states of Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin. They targeted people from different walks of life using various methods to gain access to their vehicles and their homes. Their crimes included beatings and strangulations and sexual assaults. This week's prolifically sick mastermind story belongs to Alton Coleman and Debra Brown. Now, I gotta warn y'all that this episode contains some very graphic descriptions of some very heinous crimes against young girls. So be mindful. I will give you a trigger warning before I go into the details to give you an opportunity to fast forward if you so choose, okay? So let's get into it and let me tell you a little bit of background story on Mr. Alton. So he was born November 6, 1955 in Waukegan, Illinois, third of about seven children born to a prostitute. Now, I'm not making no excuses for Alton, but the nigga did have a fucked up childhood that was full of dysfunction, abuse, neglect, and hypersexuality. Like they say his mama threw him in a trash can when he was a baby, and his grandmama went out there and got him out the trash and brought him back in the house. Y'all know that's kind of like how Lucius did in Empire. Y'all remember when he threw his son in the trash can because he caught him in his mama's heels and Cookie went out there? If you never saw it, it's a good look if you want to watch it. But anywho, his home life was far from ideal. Sex, prostitution, drugs, that's all he knew because they were living a hard knock life and mama and grandmama had to get it how they could. Their house was kind of like a brothel or a cat house. You know, you could go there for a good time if you had a little change to spend. If you had a little money, you could get you some liquor, have a card game or a dice game, and get you some cat if that's what you wanted on the menu. You know, they was whatever you needed, they kind of provided, right? And Alton was brought up in all of this bullshit. His people and the people in the neighborhood gave him a nickname. They called him Pissy because he was a constant bedwetter. Now, I'm sure that did wonders for his emotional state as well. But, you know, coming up hard is not uncommon in our community, right? So that's not an excuse, but these people were some strange birds that was attempting to raise this boy. Like, they were saying that he was engaged in group sex and bestiality with his mama and his grandma. Like, who in the fuck got this boy in here messing with whatever. But either way, his mama and his grandma had him out here in these streets doing some wild shit. And add to that, his grandmama was a practitioner of voodoo, and they said she had him sacrificing animals and stuff at a young age. That's a lot for a youngster to grow up in. And, without a lot of structure in the house, it's no surprise that he dropped out of school. And when he dropped out of school, he got down hard with that gang life, which isn't much of a surprise either for a lot of reasons. Like, he wasn't getting any love at home, so the gang probably brought a sense of belonging into his life. He had some people who wanted him to be with them. And with a nickname like Pissy, being in a gang probably got him a little bit of respect or fear. Because, baby, Alton, they say, was not afraid to throw them hands either. And once he was for the streets, he was down for all the wrong shit. Like, he was no stranger to the police. They knew him by name and by sight. His criminality started showing up immediately, and it was some crazy shit. Kind of like last week's mayhem maker, Cora Watts. Alton would get some serious charges leveled against him, and somehow, some way, he always skated without any real punishment to fit the crimes. And I think that that's what contributed to the criminal that he became because he never faced any real consequences for his actions. That shit made him bold as fuck. It made this nigga think that he was invisible. And his criminalistic activity started early in the 70s. And he should have been in prison trying not to drop the soap. But instead, he was getting pass after pass after pass after pass from the judicial system that left him out here on these streets to wreck the lives of countless people. What I'm about to drop on you now is like the pregame show. This was like Alton's on the job training that he did before he graduated into his reign of terror. Now, at 18, he is accused of kidnapping and raping 54-year-old Eleanor McIntyre at gunpoint with one of his homies on December 27th of 1973. Now, they stole her dignity, they stole her money, and they stole her car. And as if that wasn't enough, the judicial system came right back and then stole her justice because they dropped the kidnapping and rape charges against Alton and they only charged his ass with burglary. Like, what the fuck? I don't know what life was like in 73 because that was before my time, how in the hell did he do all of that to this woman and only get a burglary charge? Hashtag protect women must not have been a thing back then. Or it's more likely that because his crimes were against people of his own color, the cops, the judge, the jury, whatever, they didn't give a damn. And for his attack on Eleanor, he got a 6-year sentence. And he only served 3 years at the Joliet Penitentiary. Now, Alton got free and he tried to make up for lost time with a whole bunch of charges for sexually assaulting an assortment of women and men from 1976 to 1983. It's kind of like he felt like he was on the JV squad and he really wanted to be on the varsity squad. So he was practicing to make it to the big leagues of criminality, right? So he's out the joint, and off the bat, he is accused of raping 17-year-old Sherry Patterson. But he's acquitted. They say it's not enough evidence. But check this shit out. While he was in the county jail for raping Sherry, this nigga raped 3 dudes in the jail with him at Lake County Jail. Yes, you heard me right. I said this nigga rapes 3 niggas while sitting in jail for rape. How in the fuck do you rape 3 men? Like, where were the COs? I mean, after the first one, you would think that they would put his ass in the hole or something. At least that's what they do on TV. But how in the fuck did he get to number 2 and number 3? I mean, like, was it a gang thing? You're going to see that Alton has an unquenchable thirst for violent sex, and jail was not going to stop him. And following their normal protocol, they didn't hold him accountable for his crime. Instead of charging him with rape, they charged him with battery for those men's assaults. And it's hard for women to come forward after being raped, let alone a man, let alone 3 to raise their hands and tell what was done to them. To have that shit downgraded had to be excruciating, right? I have so many questions. Questions that I know I will probably never get the answers to, but I want to know how in the fuck he pulled that shit off. So he gets out of jail after serving about 6 months for raping three dudes, and he wastes no time finding his next victim. He meets 22-year-old Dorothy Hawkins at a club, and they hit it off. He seems cool to Dorothy, who's in the Navy, so she's a credible, level headed person out here serving her country. And Alton does what he does best, he rapes her. And don't you know they found him not guilty? I mean, basically, they were like, Dorothy, thank you for your service, but since you was out at the club drinking, you must have given him consent. That's some bullshit. Like, Alton is a textbook case of how men can use their dicks as instruments of terror and then get a fucking slap on the wrist. And people wonder why rape victims don't come forward. Then in 1981, he is accused of raping a 14-year-old girl and her friend. Once again, the case is dismissed for lack of evidence. Like his fucking history isn't evidence enough of the type of shit he liked to do. These are children who are saying that he is the one. But no, they let this nigga slide again. Then in 1982, police suspect him in the rape and murder of a 15-year-old girl. But like previous cases, they just didn't have enough evidence to prove it. Here comes the real fuckery now. In 1983, he is accused of molesting his 8-year-old niece, Melinda Snow. Not once, but two goddamn times. Melinda's mama, her name was Terry Coleman. She's Alton's half sister, but y'all know we don't do halves and steps. We either brother and sister or we ain't nothing. And following this same old two step, the case is dismissed for insufficient evidence. You see, at this point, we wouldn't have needed no police or the court system, baby, because I would have dealt with that ass Old Testament style. First, I'd have started out playing a little grit ball with that ass. Come on, Medea, y'all know what I'm talking about. And then we'll move on to like razor blades and lemon juice. And once I got done fucking his ass up for fucking with my baby, it would not have been a body for them to find. Ain't no motherfucking way. But hey, I digress. Still walking around, breathing free air, he sets his sights on a new target. You see, Alton likes them young girls, and he gets close to their mamas to get close to their daughters. And in February of 1984, he made friends with a woman named Doretha Thompson. And Doretha had a 14-year-old daughter named Shalandra. He raped Shalandra at knife point on February 28th, 1984. And he was arrested and he made bail. And they told him to be in court to answer for these rape charges 3 months later on May 30th, 1984. That's when he was supposed to come back to court for Shalandra's rape. You're going to see that Shalandra is going to be the last rape victim that he allowed to live. Alton realized that if they were dead, they could not testify against him. Now, I want to pause here for a second because during this time, Alton has a girlfriend, and her name is Debra Brown. By all accounts, Debra was a bit slow. Y'all know what I mean by slow. They said she was a quiet girl, but she was easily manipulated. And her backstory is that she was also born in Waukegan in 1962. She had 10 brothers and sisters, came from a good home with a stable family life, and she is the poster girl for good girl gone bad because she was out here living life as a productive citizen, engaged to a man that her family liked when she ran across Alton. And baby, that motherfucker must have put that good on her, cause honey, she ditched her fiance and moved in with Alton at his grandmama house. You remember the voodoo priestess? She over there with them. She is helping to take care of the old lady and was there for almost 3 years. So she was there when a lot of this stuff was going on. And what's crazier is that Alton did not try to hide his true self from her. She knew exactly what kind of shenanigans he was into, and she still willingly turned to a life of crime with Alton. So, yeah, she was young and dumb, but she was down with all the bullshit that her man was down with. So, let's go back to the story. So remember the crimes that I have been telling you about? These were just the pre-game show, practice for the big game. So he has raped Shalandra and he has to go back to court, right? And you might be thinking that this raping rapist who rapes probably skipped out on his court date. Nope. Not this audacious nigga. He does indeed go to court on May 30th, but it's what he did the night before court that sets up a crime spree that puts him in the prolific category. So it's May of 1984, the month that he is supposed to go to trial, and has a girlfriend, right? But he has made friends with a woman named Juanita Wheat, a mother of two in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Juanita would see this guy around the neighborhood riding his bike, and he eventually struck up a conversation with her. And as the month went on, every time he saw Juanita, they would talk and laugh and shoot the shit. And he would come over to her house and hang out and stay for dinner and shit. And I told you this nigga had a mouthpiece that was on point for a Jerry curl nigga that smelled like pee. I'm just saying. But that's how he got him. And Alton has been biding his time to get next to Juanita's daughter, a 9-year-old girl named Vernita Wheat. So all month long, he kicking it with Juanita, the mama, playing with her kids because she has a young son too. And Juanita seems to think, he's a pretty good dude. And her kids like him, and she probably thought this one might be a contender. Well, on May 29th, the day before he has to go to court for a rape charge, he takes Juanita and her kids to a local carnival. And they are hanging out and they are having fun. And then that night, they're headed back to Juanita's house, and he tells her, "Hey, baby, I got a surprise for you, but it's big. It's a stereo, and the speakers, I need help carrying them. Can Vernita go with me to go get these speakers?" And you know, Juanita at first was like, I don't know, but they were friends, right? And Vernita likes him. So after a little bit, Juanita was like, okay, she can do it. And Alton is supposed to just stay around the corner, right? So he give her his address and tell them, we'll be right back. So they leave. And it's about 10:15 at night when they leave. What in the world? I can't go there, but I couldn't see sending my kids out at 10:15 at night to go get nothing. But she did. She let them go. It's 10:15, and by 10:45, there's no Alton, there's no Vernita, and Juanita is starting to lose it. So she does what any parent that has let their child go off with a stranger would do. She goes to the address that Alton gave her, and it's an abandoned building. Her heart must have fallen to her feet when she saw that empty space. And she immediately started searching around the area looking for her child, but no dice. Nobody's there. So then she goes to the police and she tells them, "Excuse me, Mr. Police Officer. My friend Robert Knight took my daughter and they disappeared." You heard me. Alton gave that ass an alias. He told her his name was Robert Knight. And so the police run the name in the system, and there is not a Robert Knight in the system. Then they give her a book of mug shots to look at to see if, just by chance, if the man that you know is in this book. And she's flipping and flipping and flipping, and sure enough, she found the mug shot for the man that she knew as Robert Knight. The police know who and what Alton is, and now they are very concerned for young Vernita, as they should be, because Alton took her back to his city, Waukegan, Illinois, transporting that minor across state lines, and he strangled and beat her. Her body was too badly decomposed when it was found to determine whether or not she had been sexually assaulted or not. Now, I'm not sure how they missed the fact that Alton was due in court the following day, but they did. And Alton is on some next level fuckery at this point. And I guess he thought, they're going to lock my ass up. So I'm just going to go out with a bang by kidnapping and raping and killing a little girl. I told y'all this is one sick motherfucker. And you would think that since he has done some bullshit, that he would not go to court the next morning. Wrong. After being out all night, he comes home to his girlfriend Debra and he tells her, "Hey baby, I did something real bad." And Deborah's like, "Okay, baby." And then he changes his clothes and is off to see the judge. When the court clerk called out, "Alton Coleman," this nigga said, "Present." Now, I don't know exactly what happened during that court appearance, but it must have been something like they scheduled the trial for a future date and let Alton skip out on his merry way. And what a mistake this was, because this begins the start of a crime spree that puts him squarely in the big leagues of criminalistic behavior. Because Vernita is a tender age child, Alton has moved up in the world, and not only are the local police looking for him, now he got a federal warrant out for his arrest for Vernita. And so the police and the FBI are at all his known addresses. They're at his grandmama's house where he lives with his girlfriend Debra, and they are questioning everybody. They go to his sister's house. You remember the one who Niecy raped? They go looking at over there. Don't see him. All of the neighborhood spots that he hangs out at, they are everywhere looking for Alton. They talking to the taxi drivers and asking them, if you give this man a ride, let us know. They trying to find him, but he has gone dark and nobody knows where he is. And then one day, a taxi driver remembers giving him and a little girl a ride. He tells the police where he picked them up at, as well as where he dropped him off. And so they retrace his steps and they go to where the cab driver dropped him off. And when they get there, they meet another man who worked at a scrapyard who says that he saw Alton walking with a little girl and points them in the direction that they went. And the police and the FBI, they start searching this area that is just full of abandoned buildings. But it's a slow process because Vernita could be anywhere. And the search goes on for days and then for weeks. Here's a PSA. I don't know who needs to hear this, but please don't let your kids go off with your new boo or your new possible boo. You don't know that man. You don't know that woman. Hmm. So the police are looking for Alton. The FBI is looking for Alton. They've questioned Deborah, but she is, I don't know nothing. I ain't seen nothing. And I don't know where he could be, right? Lying, of course, because Alton came back to the house and the two of them skip town and go off into the world to cause all types of mayhem in the Midwest. So now we're going to talk about this actual crime spree. It starts off on June 1st of 1984. Old dynamic duo here, they steal a car from a man named Robert Carpenter. Some way, somehow, they talk their way into convincing Robert to let them spend the night at his house, let them borrow his car. So now they mobile and they hit the road and they leave Wisconsin behind, headed to Indiana. And on June 18th, 1984, Tamika Turks, a 7-year old, and her aunt, Annie, a 9-year old, were getting candy from a store in Gary, Indiana, when they met a man and a woman on bikes that struck up a conversation with them. Now, I want to read to you how this crime was described in one of his appeals, how they summed up the attack on these girls to the Supreme Court of Indiana in 1998. And this is going to be the trigger warning, y'all. I have to warn you that this is extremely graphic. So you can take about a minute, minute and a half to fast forward this if you don't want to hear this very graphic, detailed crime. I'll wait. Okay. Quote, our earlier opinion summarizes the facts of Coleman's crime. In June of 1984, Coleman and his companion, Debra Brown, approached two young girls in Gary. The girls were 10-year-old Annie Hilliard and her 7-year-old niece, Tamika Turks. They enticed the girls into a wooded area with a friendly offer of clothing. Once there, Coleman told the girls that he was going to play a game. He then took off Tamika Turk's pink shirt, cut it into shreds with a pocket knife, and tied both girls' hands, mouth, and legs. Tamika began crying. Coleman responded by stomping viciously on her face, chest, and stomach with his foot. Afterward, Coleman and Brown carried Tamika away. Tamika's body was later discovered with a piece of bed clothing tied around her neck. Coleman next forced Annie Hilliard to perform oral sex on him and on Brown. And while baby Annie was performing oral sex on Brown, Coleman was raping her. Finally, Coleman and Brown simultaneously strangled her with their belts until she passed out. Incredibly, Annie regained consciousness and she walked out of that wooded area. A young woman and her mother noticed her and took her in and eventually called an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors discovered cuts so deep in Annie's vaginal area that her intestines were protruding into her vagina. There is no place in hell that is hot enough. There is no hole that is deep enough for this type of criminal. But I can tell you that this case, when they were convicted, would give him a death sentence. It absolutely would. But they weren't through. Y'all, this was just the beginning. On June 19th, the police find Vernita in an abandoned building, raped, bound, and discarded. And while the police are finding Vernita in Wisconsin, Alton and Debra are targeting their next victim. They have a knack for befriending church people. And it makes sense to me because church people are always trying to save somebody's soul. And Alton put that good talk on them. Debra made them feel safe because she was a woman, and bam, they got him. Donna Williams made the mistake of being a good person and got friendly with this fucked up duo. Donna was a 25-year-old hairstylist, and as she was leaving church one day, she told her friends that she was headed out to scoop up some new friends that she had met to hang out for a while. And she was never seen again. 2 weeks later, her car was found in Detroit, Michigan, and inside of her car, they found Alton's fingerprints and a fake ID that belonged to Debra. And then a couple of weeks later, on July 11th, they found Donna's body in an abandoned building. They could tell that she had been strangled, but because of the state of decomp, they were unable to determine if she had been sexually assaulted. Alton and Debra are suspects in her murder, but they were not charged with her murder. However, Alton does get a charge of kidnap for her. So, how is this possible? If he kidnapped her and she ends up murdered, isn't he the kidnapping, murdering murderer? I'm just saying. I don't have a law degree, so, I don't know. On June 24th, there is a woman that's just minding the business that pays her when they ran up on her and pulled out a gun on her. And they make her take them to Ohio, right? They strong her into her car because they've had enough of Indiana. They want to get the fuck out of Indiana. And the woman figures that they're going to fuck her up anyway, so she got to jump on them. She intentionally crashed her car into a dump truck on I-75 in Michigan. Miss Ma'am jumped out that car and ran for her life. Smart woman. And she got away. They originally wanted to go to Ohio, but now they are instead in Michigan. So now they need new wheels and some money to get to their intended destination. The police and the FBI are still looking for Alton and Debra, but they are always one step behind. They cannot get out in front of the diabolical duo because it's hard to predict where they're going to attack next. So the authorities do the only thing that they can do to put pressure on Alton and Debra. Now, you've heard of the FBI's most wanted list, right? Well, that's a list of the top 10 individual criminals wanted in the United States, right? It's always 10 individuals. Well, at this point, the FBI has decided to make an exception for this case. See, the 10 criminals on the list were bad people, and none of them 10 were apprehended, nor could they be taken off. So, in a rare move, they added an 11th mugshot to the list. Alton Brown was the 11th most wanted person in America, and every post office and jailhouse had his picture on it now. The FBI was applying that pressure, and eventually it would pay off. Now, here is a fun crime fact. The top 10 list is usually just that, it's 10 people who are wanted by the FBI. But there have been 13 special editions of instances where the list has been expanded to have more than 10 people on it. And a couple of those additional times were one time for James Earl Ray for the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., warranted. And then a man named Ramzi Yusuf for the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. So Alton should count himself as one of the criminal elite, I guess, to make it as FBI top 11 most wanted, right? But I just thought that was a fun fact that you guys might want to, I don't know, use it a trivia one day. Moving on in this crime spree on June 28th, Palmer and Marge Jones, ages 62 and 59 respectively, in Dearborn Heights, Michigan, were home doing the things that seniors do when Alton and Debra did a kick dough and beat their asses and robbed them. Like, how sick do you have to be robbing and beating up on old people? But in this case, Alton and Deborah, they don't care, young or old. Anybody can get this. Like, anybody can get this crime. And as far as the robbery part of this attack, all they got was 86 funky dollars from this couple. But like, people will take your life for $1. So to put these people through all of this for less than $100, and of course, after beating them up, they stole their car and went on off on their merry way to continue their crime spree. A few days later, on July the 2nd, they made friends with a woman named Mary Billups. Now, Mary is 55 years old, and she meets Alton and Deborah on a playground in Detroit. So many questions. They hit her up with a hard luck story, and again, Mary is a kind hearted Christian woman. She was charmed and she wanted to help. So Mary allowed them, these people that she just met on the playground today, to stay in her house until they could get something going. Because she believed everybody deserved a helping hand and she would be their hands. Mary's friend, a lady named Marion Gaston, stopped by the house that same night, and Mary introduced Marion to her new friends. Well, no good deed goes unpunished because they were tied up, gagged, and beaten with a wrench. And while Alton was beating on their asses, he is ranting and raving about how blacks were forcing him to murder other blacks. Can you imagine the terror that these ladies had to have felt? I mean, it's one thing to be getting your ass beat by somebody. It's not a pleasant experience from my understanding, but it's another thing to know that you getting beat up, beat down, beat around by a motherfucker that is batshit crazy. Like, that has got to be the most terrifying thing in the world. And just like with Palmer and Marge, they stole Marion's car on the way out. They were still headed to Ohio. And they're still continuing to target Christians for their shenanigans because once they hit Ohio, one of their first stops is in Toledo, Ohio, where they are ministered to by a pastor named Reverend Ernie Jackson. And as a man of God, he is ministering to the couple and he introduced them to someone who could help them on their Christian path. A 30-year-old woman named Virginia Temple, who is a single mother of 5 children, ages 10 and under. You know, if the pastor makes the introduction, then surely this must be good people, right? If you can't take the pastor's recommendation, who can you? And so she extends an invitation for these two strangers to stay with her at her house with her 5 kids. These two people that she just met. And I'm thinking that the pastor probably told them that she would be a good help on their Christian walk and told Virginia, help however you can, baby. Just let the Lord lead you. And Alton likes charming these mothers to get next to the daughters that he is targeting, and ever so gracious and totally clueless to the evil that she's facing. Virginia brings the devil right into her home. And these dirty motherfuckers, a couple of days later, on July 7th, forced Virginia and her 10-year-old daughter Rochelle to the basement of their own house and beat them and raped them and strangled them. And when they were done, they hid them bodies in the crawl space of the house in the basement. And then to put the icing on this shitty ass cake, they then robbed the house of clothes and jewelry, mind you, while Virginia's other 4 children are right there watching them, scared. These real life monsters who just did something real bad to their mama and their sister, and they can't do nothing but hide and cower and wait for them to leave. Thank God they didn't do nothing else to them babies. Killing their mama and their sister was bad enough. They did not hurt the other four children in the house. I guess if there was some type of silver lining other than to scar them for life, they didn't physically harm the other four children. But them motherfuckers was not done with their mayhem for the day. After they left Virginia Temple's house, they rolled up on Frank and Dorothy Dubnik, a 77 and 73-year-old couple. And they played on their kindness too. They knocked on their door and asked them could they use their phone. Now, some of y'all might be young and be like, what? But you have to understand that this was the 80s and there was still some semblance of decorum in society. You could perhaps go and knock on a stranger's door and ask them to use their phone because your car had broke down or something you was lost. And these people would bring either let you come in their house to use their phone or either they would have a cordless phone or one of them phones with a very long cord and they would bring the phone to you and allow you to use their phone, right? Well, Frank and Dorothy, kind people, say, yeah, you can use our phone. And of course, this would be a terrible decision for Frank and Dorothy because they are entertaining natural born killers. But fortunately for them, they were only tied up and gagged and roughed up a little bit, right? Had their car stolen and what little cash they had at the house, all of that got taken as well. And for this, Debra and Alton caught a robbery charge, but no assault charges, which is crazy as fuck because they invaded these senior citizens' home. And how the fuck is that not an assault? Like, make it make sense. Then a few days later, a 15-year-old girl from Cincinnati is reported missing by her parents. Tony's story was last seen with a man and a woman matching the description of Alton and Debra on her way home from summer school. A week later, Tony's body was found in an abandoned building. They could determine for certain that her cause of death was strangulation, but because of the decomp again, they didn't know if she was raped. But they did recover DNA, and it was a match to old Bonnie and Clyde. And for this crime, Alton got a death sentence, and Deborah got a death sentence as well. This need for violence has still not been sated, and this killer couple is making their way through Ohio on a rampage. Next up is Harry and Marlene Walters, a 45 and 44-year-old white couple. They had a camper for sale. You know, one of those things you hook to your truck and you can go camping with a camper. They had a camper for sale in Norwood, Ohio, which isn't that far from Cincinnati. Alton and Deborah posed like they were interested in purchasing the camper. Neighbors said that Alton and Deborah spent hours at the Walters home that day, just chatting and drinking coffee on the porch and just kicking it. And eventually, after you spent hours shooting the shit with somebody, those nice people invited them inside. And once they got inside, they did their thing. You know how they do. Harry went upstairs to go get the title to the camper. And as soon as he got up the steps, Coleman started beating his wife Marlene with a candlestick. Just beating on her. They say he beat her more than a dozen times, 2 dozen times, crushing her skull in. And when Harry came back downstairs, Alton jumped on his ass too. And he beat him till he passed out. I mean, he beat this man so bad with this candlestick that a sliver of the candlestick broke off and went through his skull into his brain. It left this man with brain damage. And then Alton stabbed him for good measure to finish him off. And then they tied up their hands and feet. Like, why tie them up if you already think they dead? Like, why go through this additional trouble? But they're just sick people and they were doing sick shit. And so Harry and Marlene's daughter came home later on that night, see the place has been ransacked, and then she found her parents fucked up in the basement. Miss Marlene died. Her husband was fucked up, but he did recover, and he was able to identify who attacked him. Now, this was the first case that Alton was tried for in Cincinnati after they eventually caught them. It also gave Alton his first death sentence and Deborah her first life sentence. So July 16th, somewhere around in there, they start backtracking. They ready to go home. And so they leave Ohio and they go to Kentucky. And they decide that a good night ain't a good night if it don't include kidnapping. And they kidnapped a man named Oline Carmichael Jr., who was a college professor from Lexington, Kentucky. They grabbed him up in the parking lot of his hotel. And in a strange occurrence, they placed a ransom call to his wife and demanded that she bring them some money, but they never did show up at the pickup spot. So, his wife is crazy. She don't know where her husband is. And, you know, she's calling the police. They're looking for O-line. But guess what? They do find O-line alive in the trunk of his car at a park in Dayton, Ohio. So they drove from Lexington, Kentucky to Dayton, Ohio. They just needed a ride to get to their next destination. And it had to be them because they found the car that was stolen from the Walters house in a cornfield in Lexington. So you took the Walters car, it ran out of gas, fell out, whatever. In Lexington, you grab up Oline Carmichael in Lexington, drive his car to Ohio. Like, every time they need wheels, it's what do I need to get to the next spot that I am trying to go to? Whether it's running out of gas or mechanical issues, every time they need a new set of wheels, somebody gets hurt, right? They did get charged with kidnapping and they end up getting 20-year sentences for this particular kidnapping. The next day, we coming up on close to the end of the mayhem spree, and the couple are back in Ohio, and they go to the home of Reverend Millard Gay and his wife Catherine. The Reverend is 79 years old and his wife is 77. They had met the Reverend and his wife earlier in the month. They had given them a hard luck story and played on their heartstrings, and the good Reverend and his wife allowed them to pop a squat at their house and stay. They even took them to church with them, right? Nothing bad happened. So they left, not knowing where they were leaving. They dropped them off somewhere and they went on this crime spree. But now they're back in Ohio and they need somewhere to stay. So they go back to the Reverend's house. But now, sir, y'all have been on a crime spree for the past month, and y'all on the news, and y'all on the FBI's most wanted list. So this is like not a quiet, don't nobody know what we out here doing kind of thing. Y'all shit is loud, and everybody know. And yeah, the Reverend is older, but he keep up with the news. And he tell them exactly that he know what's going on and what they have been doing, right? And he is probably trying to get them to repent and turn themselves in because he is a pastor, right? Well, that went down like a fart in church because Alton opened up a can of whoop ass on the pastor. He pistol whipped Reverend and then tied him and the missus up. Took what they could, left. Few hours later, another 70-some-year-old couple, Dallas and Flossie Davis. I love that name. You don't hear names like that no more. Flossie. She sounded like she might have been sassy too. But Dallas and Flossie Davis, they got robbed for $130, a TV, and their yellow Corvette. Then they found the body of 77-year-old Eugene Scott on his birthday in a ditch in Indianapolis. He had been shot and stabbed a whole bunch of times. Well, Renee, why they think Alton and Debra did it? Well, the reason they think that they did it is because that yellow Chevrolet that they stole from Dallas and Flossie, it wasn't too far from the body. I mean, it's a yellow car, and even in the 80s, a yellow car stood out. And now Dallas and Flossie's car is here near the dead body, but the dead man's Buick is missing. So what the hell is Eugene's Buick? We know our crime spree duo gets cars and drops cars and gets cars and drops cars. So now they have Eugene's Buick. Well, the next day, the dynamic duo's crime spree comes to an end. I told y'all that they were on the most wanted list, and the profilers had predicted that they would return to somewhere where they felt familiar. So they were going to be coming back to Wisconsin before it was all over with. And they was right. Alton and Debra went back to their old stomping grounds like they didn't have a bounty on their head. These old stomping grounds where they old friends are aware of the crimes and the rewards that are out on they wanted asses. And one of them old friends dropped a dime that the two of them was seen in a park in Evanston, Illinois. It's crazy. The police pulled up on that ass, and Billy Badass and Betty Badass, they didn't put up no type of fight when the cops rolled up on them. They just gave them fake names. And when they checked them, Deborah had a gun in her purse, and Alton had a knife in his boot. But they arrested them without incident, and the crime spree is now over. When they took them and booked them into the Lake County Jail, they separated them two from all the other prisoners. They put them in a space in the jail where they could be under constant surveillance. Every motherfucking move that they made was logged. Every step they took, every breath they made, somebody was writing that shit down. And then starts the fight between the states to figure out who gonna take them to trial first. Because remember, we got Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky. And everybody wants to be the first state to give them a death sentence. Michigan was out because they didn't have the death penalty. And there was no way these niggas wasn't gonna die for their crimes. So Ohio was like, shit, we can make that shit happen. They was on some, look, we ain't even gotta draw this out. This is not gonna be no long lengthy process. We know we can do it and we can do it quick. And they did. And all of them took them to trial. And at each trial, Alton represented himself. And he ended up cross examining Debra, who was still under his spell. She was textbook ride or die for her man. This heifer even sat up in the court and told the court at one point in time that, look, it was me. I did it all. I did the killing and I did the raping, not Alton. Ma'am, sit your ass down and get ready, 'cause we down with the fuck shit. 'Cause we believe that it ain't no fun if your homie can't have some, so you gonna get you a needle stick too, boo-boo. Alton was tried in Ohio for his crimes, and he was sentenced to death 4 times. One for each of the following: for Marlene Walters, for Tony Story, for Tamika Turks, and for Vernita Wheat. They sentenced him to die 4 times. And they didn't bring it out. They let him do his appeals. And then in April of 2002, old Alton ate his final meal. And as last meals go, it was a damn good one. I mean, the nigga ordered filet mignon with mushrooms and fried chicken and salad with French dressing, sweet potato pie with whipped cream, French fries, collard greens, onion rings, cornbread, broccoli with melted cheese, biscuits and gravy. And he wanted to wash it all down with a cherry coke. I mean, the nigga put in an order. So, like, did they order out or did the prison kitchen whip this shit up? Like, can somebody tell me how this goes? Do we order out at Outback or do, the commissary niggas go in there and whip some shit up? But like, damn nigga, that was a hell of a last meal. But I mean, if you gonna have a last meal, you might as well do that shit up. He also wrote a bullshit apology letter to the families of his victims. Fuck you and your apology. Go to sleep, nigga. And he did. He was given that needle stick at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility. Now, Alton Coleman is the only man in the United States history to be sentenced to death in 3 different states. Now, I was in my feeling a little bit about this because I am neither for or against the death penalty. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I truly believe that vengeance belongs to the Lord. But I also think that some bad people need to be exterminated. But I also think that if death is warranted, I think it should be a horrific death. Like, not no damn shot that's just gonna make you go night night forever. I'm talking about horrific, like, let's do a firing squad, but they all got 22s and little small caliber guns like BBs and shit. So you have to suffer through like 1,000 shots before you actually die, right? Or the electric chair. Oh, Sparky. I ain't mad at it. But I feel like it should be like low voltage or something. Did y'all see the Green Mile? Y'all remember when Percy didn't wet that sponge? Yeah, I'm talking about like that. If you gotta die, let's make that shit painful as possible. I know I ain't perfect. God is still working on me, y'all. I am a work in progress. I'm just saying. Now, Deborah, she had her trials too. Now, she was just 21 when she was arrested, and when all was said and done, she caught 2 death sentences in Ohio and Indiana for the deaths of Marlene Walters and for Tamika Turks. But because she was determined to be mentally deficient, remember I told y'all she was slow, they commuted her death sentences, life in prison sentences of more than 140 years. She is locked up at the Dayton Correctional Institution. And in 2005, she made a video apologizing to the families of her victims. Ain't nobody trying to hear that shit, Otis. Like I said, she is still serving her time today in Dayton, and she will be there until the day that she dies. During one of Alton's trials, the judge said, quote, "You have to be careful because Alton Coleman has a way of maneuvering you. He uses people, uses psychology against you. And I don't know whether it's rational or a reflex action, but suddenly you find that everybody is on the defensive and he's on offense. He's had the whole sheriff's department and opposing counsel on the defensive. He does it so that he gets away with what he's doing, and you're so busy defending yourself that he walks out the door. He is very good at that." End quote. I think that that is an apt description of the type of manipulation tactics that Alton was able to use against his victims and the court, right? Can't say it enough. We have got to be on guard, y'all, because evil people are out here and they are preying on us every day. We want to believe the best of people, but there are just some evil motherfuckers out there that use our want to see the good in people to their advantage. It's crazy, I've been told that I am an ice queen and I don't show emotions and that I'm just skeptical of everybody. And I don't have not now damn problem with that. With me, you are suspect until you are proven worthy. I ain't let my kids be around everybody that I met or that I kicked it with. If a nigga met my kid, I knew his full government name, where he lived, where his mama lived, where he worked. I knew his friends. I knew all kind of shit, and I would test their asses to death. Needless to say, over the years, only a few made it into the inner circle, which is not to say that I wasn't out here living my best life, cause boo boo, I was. I just kept my home life mine, and I met these niggas away from my home. These days, the world is so crazy that I can't even imagine trying to date with young kids. Crime is happening everywhere, and scamming is a new full time job. Like it's my trust now is at an all time low. But I encourage you all to make sure you know who you think you know. I mean, now we can do background checks on prospective booze with a few keystrokes. You can be just like Nike and just do it. And I encourage you to just do it. There's no such thing as being overly protective and being overly cautious. We have got to protect ourselves because these criminal masterminds are not walking around with a sign on their forehead. They don't have a specific look. By all categories, if you see the pictures of Alton Brown, he kind of looked to me like DJ Quick, a low budget DJ Quick. If you're too young to know who DJ Quick is, go look him up. But he had a jab curl but he could talk and he would put people off their guard. And people do that every day now, right? So again, I just need you guys to remember background checks. Don't be so trusting. Please, please, please protect yourselves because crazy people are out there. So, guys, this has been the story of Alton Coleman and Debra Brown, two of the most prolific melanated criminals you've never heard of. But now you know. One of the main reasons I'm doing this podcast is to educate. I'm here to remind you that there are some really sick and twisted crimes happening to innocent people everywhere by people of all colors, of all creeds, of all sexual orientations. And while the mainstream media will have you believing that black crimes are singular in nature, one black person killed one other person for usually a crime of passion or something that's drug related, but that is simply not true. We are out here. We have been out here heavy, doing all kinds of bullshit. And we've been getting away with it because this myth that has been spread far and wide that black people don't do this kind of stuff is just that. It's a myth. And we are being discounted. And that is to our detriment because in many cases, these criminals hunt among the people that they are most comfortable with, the ones that look like them. Remember, there used to be a time when, as a black person, you would hear about a crime and immediately say, I know they weren't black. And once upon a time, we thought that that was true. But as this podcast shows, this stuff has been going on for a long time. Those days of being naive and having our heads stuck in the sand have got to be over, boo boo. I am one of the keepers of the oral history of some of the sickest skeletons in our collective melanated closet. And because I want you to know that some shit has popped off that didn't get no play that you really need to know about. And besides, you like true crime, right? I hope that you have found this episode interesting and informative. And if you did, why don't you drop a review and tell me all about it? And then I need you to tell a friend, to tell a friend, and then tell your mama and them to join the New War Nation. Melanin Mayhem would love to hear from you. You can find us on all the socials: Facebook, Insta, X. We're at Melanin Mayhem Podcast or at Melanin Mayhem Pod or at Melanin Mayhem PC, depending on which platform you are on. And if you know of a melanated baddie that you'd like for me to do an episode on, you can reach out at melaninmayhempodcast@gmail.com. Until next week, y'all, stay vigilant. And remember, if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. New Orleans Nation is one love, and we are out.